Welcome to Small Business, Big Network, the podcast for small business owners who want big results from their networking. I'm Liz Drury, a freelance voiceover artist who knows that if you're not working, then networking could help. Simon Raybould is a presentation trainer and the founder of Aware Plus. He's also a speaker and an author. As an introvert, Simon likes to have targets when he's going networking, and he describes himself as having SAS tactics to get in and get out. This week's episode is very kindly sponsored by Virtue Alley. Alison Matthews is a virtual pair of hands who can help small business owners with overwhelming tasks, such as running events or creating online courses. You'll hear more about her services later in the episode. Just listen out for the ding. Thank you very much for being my guest on the podcast today, Simon.
Absolutely my pleasure. I am so very, very much looking forward to this.
Now, you're a speaker, an author, a trainer. You wear lots of hats, Simon, but I wanted to dig into your background first, and I spotted that you have a PhD in medical geography, and you did very hard sums. Tell me something about that.
Well, the computer did the very hard sums. All I had to do was tell the computer what sums to do. But it's a fantastic thing where one of my kids once was in the back of the car explaining, and this is when she was 8 or 9 or something, explaining to a friend of hers what Daddy was a doctor, and she just said, "A doctor, yeah. I think it's a bit like a brownie badge, but a little bit harder."
Oh, I love that description.
Yep, I'm just like that. I had a favourite other daughter, but yeah, I was looking at the trying to find the causes of acute lymphoblastic leukemia in children.
Wow.
So we were looking at patterns of where these children lived when they acquired ALL, or where they had lived before that, looking to see if there's any patterns in all of that kind of jazz, and debunking some myths about the kind of thing that had, you know how that all the old wives' tale of things like injections, vaccines causing autism, that kind of nonsense.
Yep.
Well, there's a whole bunch of nonsense things about leukemia as well at the time. We were able to debunk a lot of those.
Yeah. And so what did you do after university, after you'd got your brownie badge?
Well, I went straight from that into being a researcher, and I spent 2.5 years as a research scientist. And I like to think that's what kind of makes me a bit different as a speaker and as a presentations trainer, in that I don't just say to people, "Oh, this is what works for me, try this."
Yeah.
I look at the research papers and go, "This works for 85% of the population, do this."
Yeah.
If it doesn't work for you, we'll try this that works for a further 10% of the population. And if you are the 5% of the population for whom this doesn't work at all, well, blimey, that's unlucky, isn't it? So I don't do the warm and fuzzy. I'm much more orientated around it sounds really cruel to say I'm much more orientated around the suck it up and get on with it school of work. But in the real world, you can't wait for inspiration to strike. You just have to get on with it and make the best of what's in front of you.
Absolutely, using the best available information at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things that grinds my gears is sometimes people don't use the best information available at the time. They use the best information that they have been bothered to get by listening to their aged aunt who knows nothing about it, who read it on the Daily Mail website once, who get the idea.
Yeah. So after your research, what came next? Did you start running your own business at that point?
I did, and the university was great because there was a 5-year overlap between running my own business and working at the university. So what I did was, at that point, I was centre manager for what was then the UK's largest social science research unit. And it isn't anymore, and I like to think that's because I left, but I suspect the two things are not causally linked. But what I said to the university at that point was, don't put me in for any more new contracts. Because as a research scientist, you're either the best or the only. That's the only way to get funded. And of course, people at that point are coming to me and going, work on this research, please work on the research. And I'd got 9 or 10 or 11 research projects on the go at once. And I said to the university, as each of these projects comes to its natural conclusion, don't hire me out to anybody else, so that over a 5-year period, I gradually reduced my hours at the university. because in that kind of situation, you can't just walk away. You can't morally just go,
No.
bye,
No.
because, you're the best and the only. And if you walk away in the middle of it, the entire research project falls to pieces and everybody else's research falls down.
Yeah, yeah. So what did you set up your business to do?
I do an awful lot of presentation skills training. There's other stuff that goes around that, such as confidence training and assertiveness training and stuff like that. But the guts of it, the core of it, the thing that you put air quotes around this phrase, the thing that I'm famous for, the thing that I'm famous for is presentation skills training.
Yeah.
How to stand on a stage and not look like an idiot, not walk into the furniture and that kind of thing. Even if the stage is just the boardroom when you are reporting to, the senior leadership team about why you're in the red or why a project is late or all of that kind of jazz.
Yeah. So what was it that drew you to this particular field?
Oh, that's interesting. Because when I was anger mainly, because when I was running the research unit, I used to get asked the same questions over and over and over by politicians, and I figured that either politicians were dumb or research scientists were bad at explaining what they did. Now, it turns out both of those things are true, but I couldn't do anything about the politicians. So for the last bit of my time at the university in the research sector, I spent a lot of my time doing the scientific research on how better to communicate, how better to make presentations. And then my original idea was just to teach that at universities for lecturers and researchers and so on. And then I realised that everybody in the entire world needed it. So I kind of, I took the plunge. That's not true. I didn't take the plunge. As I say, there was years and years and years when I gradually did a little bit less of one and a little bit more of the other.
Yeah. So is it true that the number one fear that people have is of public speaking?
Nope.
We can
Next
debunk
question.
that myth, can't we?
We can shoot that one down.
Why do people
really
say this then?
Because it's a misunderstanding of some very dodgy research about people's greatest fears.
Yeah.
And you end up with, it started out as a joke on Steinfeld, which is that more people are frightened of public speaking than they are of dying.
Yes.
And the joke at that point is, which means that at a funeral, people would rather be in the casket than actually giving the eulogy.
Yes.
And that's clearly nonsense. But because that line was funny, and because Seinfeld in the sketch show delivered it so well, it entered the public zeitgeist as a. And that's not to say that public speaking isn't frightening. It is. But it's not the thing that everybody is frightened of. And there is a thing here that really grinds my gears, is when they say that 40% of the population has glossophobia, a phobia of public speaking. Let's face it, if 40% of the population have a phobia, it's a normal state of being, not a phobia.
Yeah.
It may be that 40% of the population find it difficult to speak in public. That's possible. But a phobia is not the same thing. A phobia is different from a fear in the same way as a migraine is different from a headache.
Yes, yeah. So who are your clients, Simon? Who is it that you're helping out? And are they sort of from particular sectors, and whereabouts are they?
Well, the reason I'm laughing is that I'm sitting here holding a mug of tea from the organised crime, in a mug that was given me by the police's organised crime unit when I was training them, because they were doing a whole bunch of outreach to businesses on how not to get yourself cyber hacked. And I was training them in how to make the presentations so that businesses paid attention to them.
Yeah.
And literally 10 minutes ago, a new website went live with me as the keynote speaker in Limerick in Ireland, where I'm headlining an industry conference on creativity and innovation in Ireland. So the short answer to your question is any organisation where there is a degree of technical difficulty in what they do. Does that make sense? So it's kind of accountants, solicitors, lawyers, coders, people who are technical experts. That's the only thing they have in common.
Yeah. And how do you help them? What kind of format does your training take?
whatever is best for the organisation. I hate it when people ask me that question. And I'm sure as an interviewer, you hate it when people like me hedge their bets and go, well, it depends. Because some people just need an hour to go, this particular trick solves that particular problem. Other people need to start from scratch and go, here is a day on the principles. Now go away and do some homework. Now we'll do some online coaching to explore why you've got your homework wrong. Then we'll all come back together as a group and we'll go over each other's presentations and that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's 2 days with homework in the middle. Other times it is literally just an hour online. Those are the extremes, but you get the idea.
And presumably with anybody, anywhere, is that right?
It is for the online stuff, certainly, yes. I tend to mainly work in the UK, Ireland and Western Europe, but that's not to say that I haven't and don't. I mean, my furthest trips have been, I think Singapore is probably my most bonkers thing. I literally flew to Singapore, did a gig, turned round, flew back again. So if anybody says, what does Singapore look like? I have no... I can tell you what the airport looks like. I know what the airport looks like. I know what their rapid transit system looks like. And I knew what the room looked like where I was speaking, but I have no idea what the rest of it looked like.
Now, you already briefly touched on this, but I'd like you to go into it in a bit more depth. What is it that makes you different from other coaches that are teaching presentation skills?
Well, most of them are instinctive. Whether they're good or bad is a different question, but most of them are instinctive. They've given a couple of presentations. People tell them it was quite interesting and quite good. Brackets, whether it was or not doesn't make any difference. People tell them it's quite good. So they think they know how to do it. And they start teaching what has worked for them. And the problem with that, of course, is that if it's worked for me, is no guarantee it's going to work for you, because you're literally a different gender, you're a different height, you're a different build, you're in a different sector, all of that kind of thing. However, there is an awful lot of research about what works most for most people most of the time. And that is what I teach. And the reason I teach that is because, as I say, I started life as a research scientist. So I'm much more orientated around the most good for most people most of the time school of thought, rather than the warm and fluffy.
Yeah. And what kind of results do your clients see once they've worked with you? How are they better?
My favourite at the moment, I've got to be careful not to name names. Hang on. Oh, sod it. You can figure out who it is for yourself. There's a client of mine has just absolutely nailed her TEDx. I mean, just nailed a TEDx. She could not speak in public before that, just could not. And now she has got a remarkably successful TEDx, which is sitting on the TED website, doing an awful lot of good in terms of helping the world deal with cybercrime and that kind of jazz. That's the kind of the extreme. In most cases, what happens is that they are maybe 15 or 20% more impactful. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you'd take a 20% improvement in salary right about now.
Oh, yeah. I would.
Or a 20% increase in the number of clients and that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
So depending on what you're trying to measure, it could be a 15 or 20% increase in engagement, a 15 or 20% increase in orders that come in, or that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
And at the extremes, at the ridiculous extremes where I just have to pinch myself, one of my clients was addressing the Gartner Internet Security Conference. My brief was to make a whole bunch of technical nerds stage-worthy. And I did that to the point where they nailed $5 million worth of work on one. Yeah, exactly. And another one was when I helped a bunch of architects devise a presentation for a pitch for some work. They got the pitch, and my wife to this day is furious that I did it on a day rate, because they've got £124 million worth of... Yeah. If I'd been on just 0.5%...
Hindsight's a great thing, isn't it?
Absolutely. But I mean, those are the extremes. Those are the extremes. In most cases, we're talking 15, 20, maybe even 25% increase in audience retention and that kind of jazz. Now, whether that translates to sales is outside my gift, because you can increase audience retention of garbage, of a really bad offer, of something that's not worth anything, and you're not going to get an increase in sales.
Yeah.
So you need to have good stuff before my material is going to be of any use to you.
Yeah. Have you been procrastinating about launching a project such as an event or online course because it seems such an overwhelming task? Are you so lost in the rabbit hole of researching that you simply don't know where to start? Or is the fear of technology holding you back? You need Virtually. Alison Matthews loves creating, and as an award-winning business consultant and project administrator with decades of experience in supporting business owners and charities, she can help you break your project down into bite-sized manageable pieces and create a framework to get it started. She's been self-employed now for 10 years and started Virtually Business Solutions to help savvy business owners be more organised, create structures and have automations to create more time, more passive income and more headspace. Let her take the tech overwhelm away and be a virtual pair of hands to support and guide you. If you'd like to know more about Ali, I'm pleased to announce that she'll be my guest next week, so do listen out for her episode. In the meantime, you can find her online at www.virtually.uk or search for Alison Matthews on LinkedIn. So are there occasions when you watch somebody give a presentation and you cringe? And are there any top tips you can give us?
I cringe half the time. We talk here about something called a sniper slide, which is the slide by which, if I had a sniper rifle, the presentation would be over. And it's, by slide 6, I've usually lost the will to live, and by slide 7, I've lost the will for the presenter to live. My bête noire is that because most presentations are so bad, people don't know that they are bad because they look at everybody else's presentations and go, it's okay, it's as good as theirs. Yeah, absolutely. Just like people go, I'm rubbish at maths, and it's okay because everybody else in the world says that they're rubbish at maths, if you know that, if you know what I mean. And it's not until you see a professional speak that you go, oh, so that's what it's supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And I'm sure this situation is very similar in your, in your neck of the woods. But everybody can talk.
Yep.
But not everybody can do it properly and do it well. If you see what I mean. So, yeah, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Tips. The biggest one I've got is the simplest one I've got is not to design your slide defensively, and not to design your presentation to tell the audience what you know. It is to design your gig to get a specific outcome. Know what the outcome is and work backwards from that.
Yeah.
Which means that, for example, if my desired outcome is to get them to download this freebie, hypothetically, everything in the presentation is designed to get them to do that, as opposed to what most people do is just tell people what the problem is, how they research the problem, and what their recommendation is about what people should do next because of their reason. Well, nobody cares about all of that guff in the middle. They just care what they should. So the silly metaphor I use sometimes is to ask people, just put your hand up for me. This is stupid for a podcast. I'm putting my hand up. This is really good. Put your hand up for me if you have ever used an Excel spreadsheet or something similar. And of course, all the audience have.
Yeah.
Keep your hand up if you have sorted a column of data using that spreadsheet. And of course, they all have, so they keep their hands up. Keep your hand up if you know the actual coded algorithm that Microsoft use. All the hands go down.
Yeah.
Put your hands back up if you care. No hands go up. Because nobody cares about the process.
Yeah.
They only care about the outcome, as it were. And yet presentations are so very, very, very often about the process of how we have got to where we are. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have that information available for when people come and ask you questions, but putting it in the presentation bores people, overloads their memory so that they can't actually remember any of it, and as a consequence, there is some depressing research that says somewhere between 85 and 90% of presentations don't result in any significant change in audience behaviour. And that's no surprise to me, because most presentations are mediocre and they just talk about, this is what I did on my holidays. Obviously, I'm kind of tongue-in-cheek about what I did on my holiday, but this is what I did at work, and these are the techniques that I used, and this is the data that I analysed, and this is the,
Yeah.
Nobody cares.
No. Now, I mentioned at the top that you're an author as well as a speaker and a trainer. So tell me about your book.
Story making, he says. Are you ready for the world's most pretentious sentence? Which book would you like me to talk about?
Yes, it was story making was the one
story
I had
making,
in mind.
yeah, okay. Yeah. So story making came about because I saw an awful lot of people online pretending that storytelling was the silver bullet that cured everything. Just tell stories. And I just used the phrase to my wife once. They're just reciting the phrase, tell stories, like some kind of demented parrot on acid. And she just looked at me and obviously decided that I was slightly unhinged. And then said, but if you're that annoyed about it, why don't you stop telling me about it and do something about it? So story making is my attempt to explain to people which stories to tell, how to tell them, why you should tell them, how you should find them, how you should... Think of it as it's a much more tactical book about story using rather than storytelling. Sure, storytelling is part of it. There's no point in having a library of stories if you never deploy them, but it is a much more tactical, specific, almost clinical tool for find stories, store stories, select stories, deploy stories, as a resource rather than just as something nice to have.
Yeah. And presumably that's available on Amazon, is it? And those kind of places?
Amazon, yeah. And there's all kinds of other places, but Amazon is probably the easiest place for people to get it, yes.
Yeah. So let's turn to the networking now. How do you like to network, Simon?
Oh, I hate networking. I hate networking with a passion and a vengeance. I am very private. I am introverted, and I'm really not necessarily all that good at remembering names. I mean, to the point where I forget my own children's names. I only have two children, right? One's called Stemegan, and the other one's called Mustephanie, because I just start the wrong one every single time. So networking, particularly group networking, the kind of thing where let's all go to a meeting and network. It's just not my thing. I can't make head and a tail out of it at all. The only way I can make myself do that successfully is to set myself a very specific set of targets.
Yeah.
Kind of SAS networking, if you like. Get in, talk to so-and-so about such and such, get out. And that sometimes means I will leave a networking meeting early if I've hit my threshold,
Yeah.
So it may be that what I want to do is talk to 3 new people I've not met before, revise my connection with 2 other people, and arrange a one-to-one with Fred.
Yeah.
And once I've done those things, that's it. Everything else after that is just drinking the free tea and coffee and getting fat on free biscuits, and I have no interest in those things. Actually, if you look at me, that is clearly a lie. I have eaten far too many free biscuits, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
So I'm very specific about what I'm attempting to do.
Yeah.
Partially to be more sensible with my time.
Yeah.
But also partially because I find that as a... Bill, you're not going to believe this, but as quite a shy person, having an agenda, having a reason, having a target, if you see what I mean, makes it easier for me to motivate myself to go along to these things.
Yeah. And although you don't really like it, you must still think that it's important and useful, otherwise you wouldn't do it at all.
Of course, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's the way I've kind of got to this process of hit and run, sort of guerrilla networking. I'm making up all kinds of words here. SAS networking, guerrilla networking, hit and run networking. Yeah, yes, it's important. Obviously, it's important, and most of my gigs now have come from networking, or what I'm going to call second generation networking. So I networked to get a lead,
Yeah.
and that lead led to a gig, and that gig led to a second gig.
Yeah.
So, for example, the GASP conference I just mentioned in Limerick, that came about because I was doing some work at Limerick University, did some networking while I was at the university, and that meant that somebody recommended me to the conference organisers. So it's a bit of a long chain, but it seems to have worked quite nicely.
Yes, yes. So do you have any tips for other people who are introverted like yourself and maybe not going to networking because they just think, oh, I couldn't cope with that?
The obvious one is that do you remind yourself you don't have to go. It's a choice you make rather than an obligation you have. And there's some interesting kind of psychological tricks you can play with yourself, which is instead of looking at your diary and going, oh God, I've got to go networking this afternoon, just turn it around and literally say out loud to yourself, oh, I get to go networking this afternoon. Now, I know that sounds like semantics, but the subconscious parts of our brains can't easily differentiate between what's real and what's fiction.
Yeah.
So if they hear you saying, I get to go networking, the subconscious part of your brain is semi-fooled by it. For example, the case study I will give you here is if you've ever been to a horror film and been frightened by the zombies, you know that the zombies aren't real.
Yep.
They are actors and CGI.
Yeah.
But the subconscious part of your brain responds as though they are real because that's the stimulus it is getting. And so this trick works in the same way. So I get to go networking rather than I've got to go networking. And the other two tips, one would be to do what I do perhaps, which is to go, what is my objective here? What am I trying to do? Because if you don't know what you're trying to do, you can't know when you've done it. And the third tip is to diarise. I can't believe I've used the word diarise in public. It's to remember that networking is part of the process. And just like me as a professional speaker, when I come off stage at the end of a gig, that is not the end of the process. That is the highlight of the process for sure, but it's not the end of the gig. And I need to do two things after that. I need to have scheduled in my diary the follow-up time, and I need to have scheduled in my diary after that the introverting time, if that makes sense, so that you don't suddenly find yourself going, done, tick box,
Yeah.
and move on.
Yeah.
I did a horrible thing once. I came off stage once, and I had committed myself so wholeheartedly to this gig that I burnt every bit of emotional energy I had got on the stage. Standing ovation, the works. And I came off stage and went to the gents' toilets to hide for 20 minutes. Which is weird because there were literally people waiting outside the toilets waiting for me to come out to say, will you work with us? Here is X thousand. And I waited till they had gone away because I didn't have the emotional energy to cope with them. Now, if I had designed my headspace, if you like, so that I thought about the gig as the climax of the process rather than the end of the process, I would have been much more prepared for the half an hour of networking and schmoozing and taking names and numbers afterwards.
Yeah.
That it took me by surprise. I felt ambushed by the fact that people were coming to talk to me. Now, in retrospect, it was blindingly obvious that if I'd done a good job, they were all going to come and talk to me. That was why I was doing the damn gig. But I didn't think of it at the time.
Yeah. It's about pacing yourself, isn't it?
Yeah. And remembering its process, not end point.
Yes. So one final question for you, Simon. It's an easy one, I promise. So if people are interested in finding out more about you or your business, what is the best place for them to find you?
This is going to sound like the world's most egocentric domain name. Are you ready?
Go for it.
It's presentationgenius.info. Presentationgenius.info. And I didn't pick that. My publishers picked that because they'd got a name of a book. They wanted to call it, they'd got a series, Presentation Genius, Sales Genius, Marketing Genius, all of that kind of jazz. And they were launching the series with Presentation Genius. And And that became a bestseller. And once I'd got a bestseller, it just made it was so stupid not to use a domain name that I just kind of went for it. Right, I'm literally on the top shelf at WH Smith. What shall I do with that? I know, I'll have a website. And just, I mean, it is unbelievably egocentric, I know, but it is as cool as it sounds to walk past WH Smith and see your book on the top shelf.
I bet it is.
That's awesome. I kept walking, and there's a photograph of my book in number one as the best seller. It never got that far. It's just that there were no assistants around, so I just moved it. I just moved it and took a photograph of it as the best seller of the week.
I think any author would do the same, Simon.
I think so. I like to think so. It was. I was beaten to top spot by Alan Sugar's autobiography, so I just put my book in front of Alan Sugar and took a photograph of it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being my guest. I really enjoyed our conversation, and
I've had a chat. I hope it's been helpful.
It really has. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Small Business, Big Network. If you found this podcast useful, please do rate, review and subscribe. And don't forget to share it with the rest of your network too.